I'm S.A. Bradley, and welcome to Hellbent for Horror, a podcast devoted to all things related to horror, where I remind you that you used to love horror movies, and you secretly still do. February is the month officially designated as Women in Horror Month, and horror fans across the land are celebrating. However, there was another celebration that occurred towards the end of last year. It was an unholy gathering for practitioners of the dark arts. In early October, groups of strangers from across the country, mostly clad in black, descended upon a quiet suburb in Georgia. Locals reported seeing these strangers gathering at the edge of a thick forest of Georgia pine known as the Wisdom Woods. These strangers entered the forest as if drawn into the darkness by some unseen force. And deep in those woods, bodies were dismembered, blood flowed by the gallon, and unholy creatures were called forth in the service of a weekend-long ritual. A ritual that came with free popcorn and coffee. A lot of coffee. I had the pleasure of attending the 2018 Women in Horror Film Festival in beautiful Peachtree City, Georgia from October 4th to the 7th. The Women in Horror Film Festival is a filmmaker, screenwriter, and community-focused festival. It is dedicated to celebrating and showcasing women directors and writers, cinematographers, FX artists, editors, production designers, composers, producers, and performers in horror cinema, as well as the teams with whom they work. And over the course of one weekend, attendees had the opportunity to watch over 70 short films and 5 full-length horror films. From body horror to experimental horror to science fiction horror hybrids to horror comedy to psychological horror and even animated films, the diversity of modern horror was on full display. I was fortunate enough to attend as press, which means I got to watch all 75 films. Not only did I get to watch the stunning array of films, but I also got to speak with the artists, the attendees, and the founders of the festival. Not much time to sleep, right? Well, welcome to the film festival world. In this episode, I'm going to give some of my impressions and some film recommendations from the festival, and we'll hear from some of the artists and the creators themselves about their experience and the inspirations for their films. The event took place at the Crown Plaza Convention Hotel, which is nestled within the Georgia pines of a golf country club community. Now, Peachtree City is about 40 miles south of Atlanta, but even though it is a rural part of the state, you aren't far away from some real horror roots. The hotel is less than 10 miles away from Sonoya, Georgia, where The Walking Dead was filmed. The Crown Plaza itself isn't visible from the main strip. I realized I had to drive into the woods on a small single-lane road to get there. It was dead quiet. So yeah, I kind of felt like I was driving right into my own horror movie. The Crown Plaza itself was an upscale hotel on 32 bucolic acres that included a convention center and also had its own movie theater. It was its own small town, and we were nestled away from the rest of the world for a weekend. It was the perfect atmosphere to let the artists hang out with each other and talk until the wee hours of the morning. And the net result of all the time together was a festival that was less about the stress of competition and more about building community. The festival is the brainchild of co-founders Samantha Kolesnik and Vanessa Ionta Wright, who are both independent horror filmmakers. Vanessa is a writer and director and producer of films like her adaptation of Stephen King's short story Rainy Season and her original film I Baked Him a Cake. I got to speak with Vanessa after the film festival weekend.
Next, we're going to do the best regional short, which this block is playing tomorrow, so you're not going to want to miss it because there is going to be an award-winning film in that block.
Vanessa, thank you so much for being my guest.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Well, what I love is how, as I continue to talk with people and I go to conventions, I keep finding people who aren't just spectators. You can, of course, find the spectators, but so many more people are compelled. They need to create something. So you got the filmmaking bug. What got you into writing and directing?
I actually started doing it before I knew what it was. I mean, even when I was really, really young, you should talk to my mom. Sometimes she loves telling me stories. I mean, in second grade, we did a really cool project where we had to write a story and we actually created a book and they showed us how to bind them and you know, the whole thing. And I wrote a book called The Witch's Castle. And it was just a creepy little story. I still have it somewhere. My mom found it in a box. She was like, look, it's The Witch's Castle. It's your first book. I'm like, yay. And then, you know, I grew up in the 80s. So my parents had a Super 8 film camera. And then they upgraded to the VHS monstrosity that weighed 40 pounds. And I kind of confiscated those things once I was old enough to know how to work them. And I mean, I just thought it was so cool to just like film me and my friends doing goofy stuff. And then we started actually writing stories. And then I started going to teachers and saying, instead of writing a paper, could I like make a movie? And it just kind of took off from there. I mean, when I was trying to figure out what to go to, you know, school for and study, I was like, I don't know what to do with my life. What the heck am I going to do? And my parents were like, you don't want to like go into film? I'm like, oh, can you do that? Is that a thing? Make a career out of that?
It's great that you have the story as well, that you started writing and drawing things. I did that with my third grade tests. So I'd get bored and I'd start drawing these things that were little cartoons, and people used to pay me a nickel to be able to take them because they loved the stories. That's the only time. It's the only time I ever made any money in the arts was in third grade. Tell me, the filmmaking bug got you, and you worked on Rainy Season. Tell me about Rainy Season. What is a Stephen King dollar baby?
Oh, it's such a cool program. If I ever get to meet him, I'm just going to give him a giant hug and be like, "Thank you for doing this." Because his work is just fun to adapt, and I think he himself loves to see his work, you know, adapted on screen. So I had taken quite a long break. You know, I had gone to school, moved to LA. I worked in music videos as a production coordinator for a couple of years, you know, lived in Atlanta working in commercials. And then I met my husband, started a family, and that's all I did. Like I kind of shut down the creative stuff for a while. And then when my son, you know, had entered kindergarten, I was like, okay, both kids are in school. I'm going to go back to writing. And so I wrote a few original screenplays and sent them off. Shriek Fest was actually the first major festival that I entered and was accepted into. And so it kind of boosted my confidence a little bit. And from there, I had met a few people and they said, oh, you know, did you know Stephen King does this program called Dollar Babies? And I had researched it and I saw that Frank Darabont had actually gotten his start because he directed The Dollar Baby, The Woman in the Room back in 83.
Right. Yeah.
And from that, Stephen King had contacted him and was, you know, went on to do The Mist and Shawshank Redemption and everything else. And I was like, this is really cool. I'm like, I don't understand. You can just pick a story and how does this work? So I applied. I applied. I looked at the list of stories. Rainy Season was one that I wasn't really familiar with. So I kind of wanted to challenge myself a little bit. And as I was reading it, I mean, just within the first page or two, I was like, oh man, this reminds me of Shirley Jackson's The Lottery.
Yes.
And of course he references that. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to go with this one because I know exactly what he's saying. And I applied, they accepted, I got a contract in the mail. I literally sent a dollar bill and I had 1 year to write the screenplay and produce the film and send it to them with, you know, the caveat being I can never put it publicly online anywhere. I can't sell it. It can't be distributed. It can only be used for festivals.
So there's so much for you to do when you're making a film. I'm sure that you had many a sleepless night. You weren't busy enough. So what was that compelled you to start a film festival?
I guess we like to torture ourselves. So Sam and I actually met at Shriekfest. We both had screenplays that were finalists, and we
Right, and that's Sam Kolesnik, who's the other co-founder.
Yes, yeah. This was our brainchild. We met. We didn't get a chance to really spend a lot of time with each other at the fest, but we connected through Facebook. And so, we had connected, and she had mentioned that, she was wanting more experience with production and wanted to actually, start producing films. And she had just finished the first film that she wrote and produced called The Price of Bones. And, I was just getting ready to launch crowdfunding for rainy season, and we really didn't know each other at all. I was like, all right, you want more? Here, help me. Help me make this happen, because I don't know what I'm doing either. And we just started talking literally every single day. And she, helped make rainy season happen. And kind of in the midst of that, she sent me her script for I Baked Him a Cake. It was this, 5-page micro short. And she's like, what do you think of this? I'm like, it's messed up. What's wrong? Do you want to talk? And she's like, what do you think about, do you think you could come up to Pennsylvania? Why don't we just shoot this in a day? I'm like, yeah, let's do it. So we did that. We had rainy season under. And so then we started, heading to more fests together. And we just talked a lot. We talked about the great things that we loved about the fest. And we might even say oh, they didn't do such a good job with that. If we had a fest, maybe we would do this instead. And it kind of started from there. And the reason that we wanted to focus on women is we really started to notice, especially going to genre fests, there just weren't a lot of women filmmakers and screenwriters. And I was wondering where the heck they were, because I know they're there. And yeah, we just kept talking until finally we said, let's stop talking. Let's just do this.
How does one even start the ball rolling to start a festival? So you have the idea, let's start a festival. Where do you even look to get an idea?
Well, everywhere. We kind of talked about logistical things as far as what we would need. We would need a venue, a place to screen. We did look at some theaters and stuff, and of course, location. We decided, with Atlanta kind of being in this film boom, and, with The Walking Dead being a stone's throw away from my house, we were like, well, it's kind of be a cool destination. Maybe we should do it around here. And it just so happened that the Crown Plaza had a theater in the hotel, which one-stop shopping. I was like, this is perfect. It's secluded. It's in the woods. We have a theater. There's a bar. We don't have to go anywhere. This is perfect. And it was just like that. It was one thing after another. And then it was, should we have celebrities? I don't know. Who do we know? We didn't know anybody, but we knew people who knew people. My cousin, who was an amazing coordinator, worked on American Horror Story. And she had met Heather Langenkamp because Heather and her husband did the makeup for several seasons. I think it was, I'm probably going to get this wrong, for sure, season 4 Freak Show. But so my cousin Kathy was like, hey, did you want me to reach out to Heather and see if she'd be interested in talking to you? And I was like, no. Yes. And Heather immediately was on board, and I was so excited. I got an email and it was, hey, is it cool if Heather Langenkamp gives you a call? And it just started from there. And we're so grateful to Heather, because she really put us in touch with Mary and Madalena, and she put us in touch with the Soska sisters, and, and it just snowballed from there, and it helped. We were first year fest. Nobody knows who we are. Nobody knows what we're doing. So to have their endorsement and their support really helped to kind of put us on the map.
What would you say is the overriding philosophy of the Women in Horror Film Festival?
Honestly, we want to celebrate each other as artists. I think there's a lot of fests where it really is all competition and all ego. And I mean, by nature, I think the industry is that way. And, I think when you strip all of that away and you just realize we're a bunch of, vulnerable people with stories to tell, and some really amazing stories. And, I think to try to kind of combat that disparity that, there aren't enough women in these roles, or women can't do this. And it's like, well, we can, we can direct, and we can, there's some great cinematographers and composers and editors. And it wasn't so much about, I guess, knocking men out of the picture, but really just trying to shine a light on some of the amazing work that women are doing that may otherwise have been ignored for some reason or another.
I have to say that the tenor of the entire festival for that entire weekend was very welcoming. And I saw everybody hanging out with each other, and everybody was really cool about sitting around and talking with me. People were there to really absorb and enjoy the performance of their work, of course, but they were there to enjoy the art and fun of watching, which I think is sometimes lost.
I completely agree with you. And I think at the end of the day, it's like, well, why are we doing this if we're not enjoying it? Like, you work this hard, you sweat, you bleed, you pour like 110% of your soul into something. It's like, we should kick back and celebrate and enjoy it and do it together.
So the first Women in Horror Film Festival is in 2017, correct?
Yes.
So the one that I just went to was the second, that was year 2, right?
Yes.
What was the biggest thing that you learned from year 1 to year 2?
Oh, it's so many things. You want one? I think, at least for me, and I say this all the time, I'm not going to speak for Sam, but sometimes things are going to go wrong or mistakes are going to happen, and you have to kind of be adaptable and just be able to solve it and move on and not. I'm an anxious person by nature, and, and, I think anytime something can go wrong, it generally will, especially when you have that many moving parts. And, we planned to the nth degree, and it was still, something might be out of whack. And I think just letting go a little bit, because, I'd say year 1, both of us were so kind of caught up in this whole, everything has to be perfect. Everything has to be perfect. So much is riding on this. We make one mistake, we're done, and we didn't get to enjoy it as much because we were so worried. Whereas year 2, I think both of us were a little bit more relaxed. We understood that, hey, sometimes things happen, and that's fine. We'll deal with it if it happens. Luckily, nothing major happened. Nothing major happened the first year either, but it's new. So I would say just kind of relaxing a little bit and staying in the moment,
The meat of any festival are the movies and the artists who make them. However, the make or break for any film festival rests on the strength of the curation. The curators can do a great job of picking the best and strongest films, but if the sound and the projection is bad, things get painful real fast. But even if you schedule good movies and you project them with perfect image and sound, there's another way a festival can go flat. And that has to do with the blocks of movies themselves. The curators need to create interesting and unique categories, and they need to make sure that the right films find the right block. A short film can feel out of place if it's in the wrong category. And film blocks can't go too long, because watching 12 hours of films each day requires viewers to pace themselves. The Women in Horror Film Festival had 11 different categories that showcase the diverse ways horror uses to tell stories. There was psychological horror, horror comedy, science fiction horror, experimental horror, body horror, animated horror shorts, thrillers, tales of the macabre, international shorts, regional horror films, and even a block for student films. And the curators did a good job of mixing up the tones from one block to the next just to keep things fresh. All the films competed to be the best in their categories, so the filmmakers could go home as proud owners of the coveted Lizzie Award. What is a Lizzie Award, you may ask? Only one of the coolest award statues I've ever seen. The Lizzie is a pewter statue of a life-size severed hand, with the wrist bone exposed and the hand clenches a bloody hatchet. That bloody hatchet is buried in the body of a reel of film, and the tail end of the film violently floats upwards like a celluloid intestine. The blood spatter is hand-painted, so no two Lizzies are exactly alike. Hell, I wanted to make a movie right there just to get a Lizzie. Since the festival screened 70 shorts and 5 full-length films, I'm not going to be able to go into detail on all of them. But I will talk about several that left an impression. And you'll hear some of the artists talk about their films as well. One of the strongest categories in the festival was called Southern Discomfort Regional Horror Shorts. I wanted to ask, what is a regional short? Because I saw the best regional short and I saw the entire block, but talk a little bit about that.
So that was a block that we had put together. It was called the Southern Discomfort block. And we didn't want to call it local because we thought, that would kind of constitute maybe Georgia made only. And really a lot of those films were, filmmakers around the Southeast. So we had filmmakers as far north as Tennessee, South Carolina, Georgia. We might have had a Florida one in there. I'd have to look at the list because I don't remember where everybody was from. But basically that was like Southeastern filmmakers.
What I thought was so strong about these films is that they were not only personal in the story that they told, but their sense of place was also personal. The locations were as important to the story as any character, and that sense of place gave the movies in this block a distinct theme. The theme they had in common was the loneliness of not knowing where you belong, the anxiety of not knowing where you call home anymore. 3 films from this block gave interesting perspectives on that theme. In one film, the place the characters once called home is transforming into something unrecognizable and deadly. In another movie, a woman returns to her physical home only to find that she is no longer belonging there. And in yet another, a character finally thinks they found a home that welcomes them, only to find out they never really belonged there in the first place. The first film is director Brittany Brock's Little. It's a story about 2 displaced kids, a preteen boy and a waifish little girl, who meet and try to find a safe place in an old town that is being demolished to make way for gentrified renovations. But as the construction crews tear down houses and trees, they push dangerous things out of their territory to hunt new prey. I spoke with Brittany about her film and her inspirations and her own personal sense of place. And we're going to continue the theme of Southern Discomfort, the regional horror shorts. And I'm talking with Brittany Brock, who wrote, shot, and directed a movie called Little. And what I thought was very interesting about this, especially when you talked about it on the Q&A, is once again, what I saw was a sense of place, either where people no longer felt that they belonged or they've never belonged. And in this one, it's a little bit different, that the place itself is turning into something else. There's transformations between some of the characters, and there's transformations of the place itself. And I love the idea that it had that documentary feel of something like how 400 Blows shows that small area of France. So can you talk a little bit about what the movie's about and what your thoughts were?
Yeah, so Little is about 2 children that meet unexpectedly, and they navigate through their town that is going through like a massive overhaul of a combination of gentrification and deforestation, and that's also what allows these children to meet. And throughout the day, danger's kind of rising, but I wanted it to be hidden where that danger is actually coming from. And again, I was inspired a lot by what was going on in my own hometown with some of just a growing town. It's going from a small southern town to a city, so I've seen that transformation happen.
So there is that encroachment of memory being lost.
Yeah.
And what I thought was interesting is that you use the chainsaw as almost like this very strange red herring.
Yeah.
But at one point, I thought the noise of the chainsaw came from the girl. because it was so close. And he looks, one of the characters looks away, but there's a small waifish girl, and at one point she's looking up and she never speaks, but we hear this chainsaw, and it was like this harbinger of doom, and I thought that was really cool. Somebody else mentioned about a Little Red Riding Hood vibe to this. Was there anything like that you were thinking of?
No, it's fallen into this like reverse Little Red Riding Hood movie, and honestly, like, the name of the movie's Little, and like it's because she's short in stature, honestly. And like, but I'm all about it. It's kind of fallen into this, and I'm all about like happy mistakes. There wasn't even a mistake. It was just a happy accident, kind of. So that just added a new layer, and people are really picking up on that, and it's actually, adding more to my story as well. So it's just something really cool that happened in the process, and I'm really happy people are picking that up as well.
Well, what I thought was really interesting, too, on the theme of region, right? There is no South Carolina city that I'm seeing. The most I see is a brick wall at one point covered in spray paint. But you have people who are without a home, it seems. There's no sense of place. They're out in the woods, which is kind of open space wilderness. What were you trying to go for with that?
There's a lot of people being displaced. I come from Greenville, South Carolina, which is... It's becoming like a new like mountainous Charleston, but it was a textile town, and people have lived there for generations and generations, and they've kind of like kept up with their family lineage and just found new jobs. So along with job displacement with that, the textile industry not booming at all, and then now those textiles are turning into, $1 million lofts. These people are being displaced, and our homeless population is rising. And I live in an area pretty much between like downtown and like the wilderness, and I see like people roaming around a lot, and it's because they are displaced and they're looking for a home. And I wanted to make a movie about kids displaced to have like a childhood just for one day, but it's also about survival.
Yeah, that childhood for one day really came through, because people don't normally... It had this little romance almost to it, but it wasn't a romantic thing. It was more of like, I'm no longer lonely. And so there was like this picking up of someone else to allow them. And I thought that was what really struck me about the film, was that the characters that you decided to examine are ones that are not necessarily seen very often. They're usually peripheral characters. They're not the main characters. And so I thought that was great. It reminded me of things like 400 Blows and River's Edge, where you're allowing a representation of people who never get to see each other.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was really great.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, and that was all intentional. I'm a big fan of both those films you just said. So, I love looking at people that don't really get lens or screen time all the time. So I really wanted to make a story for, people in the South that are living, but give them a horror film as well.
So where can people see Little next, and what's up on your plate?
So Little will be screening at Nightmares Film Festival in Columbus, Ohio. We're also in the same weekend the American Horror Film Festival in Tempe, Arizona, and then we'll have some local South Carolina screenings, Reedy Reels in Greenville, and South Carolina Underground in Charleston. And what's up next for me? I'm making a music video for a grindcore band called Worm. They're local. They're awesome. They're big fans of Little. So, and then after that, I'm working on a longer short called 29 Weeks, and it's about a single woman in her 20s dealing with the horror of her third trimester of pregnancy alone. So, yeah.
Ouch.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts about the film festival now you've been here?
Yeah, it's amazing. This is the first year I've been here. It's been awesome. Everyone has been incredible. The blocks and the programming have just been like absolutely stunning, and I'm really honored to be a part of this. So, yeah, I'm just happy to be here.
Well, Brittany Brock, thank you so much for giving me some of your time.
Thank you so much.
The next film in the Southern Discomfort block that really impressed me was Revisit, starring Jennifer Trudrung as a lost woman who revisits the sins of her past when she returns to her family's vacant home. This film works as pure cinema. In other words, you learn the story through images instead of exposition. And the images that are used and the nearly wordless performance by Jennifer Trudrung gives us a powerful and chilling look at the world through the eyes of an irredeemable person. I spoke with Jennifer, who also wrote the film, about the genesis of her story and how she experimented with our traditional concepts of home.
I'm talking to Jennifer Trudrung, and she is the writer of Revisit. Can you give me a little bit of information about what Revisit was about?
Revisit was about the idea of committing a horrific act and getting away with it, and then coming back and being haunted by that guilt and what you committed, and but kind of playing with that. And I've always been, I think because I am a loving parent who can't fathom violence against your own family, this was kind of an experiment with that also.
I think it's really interesting. What I noticed by watching all the regional films is that there were a couple things that were universal about them, and there were some things that were seemingly unique. A lot of it had to do with sense of place.
Yes.
Can you give me an idea of what you were thinking of for your sense of place in this film?
This location is actually a family home, and it's a place, it was my grandmother's, and it's one of those places that should always exude warmth, summer home, vacation home, but it has always felt distant and cold. And so, yeah, it's definitely like being in a place where you should feel safe and warm and comfortable, but there's a sense of a darker purpose or hidden guilt feelings within this warm, comforting facade. So you're spot on. There's a lot of films like that that played with that for sure. Yeah.
So I heard you speak after on the Q&A, and you mentioned that there was a big change from what you had written to what was actually going on there. So give people a little bit of an insight on how that kind of changed perhaps the tone, or how you had to really struggle to keep that tone the way that you originally wrote it.
So this was going to be my darkest film yet, and it was going to be about a young Mel, like a college, very a perfectionist-looking young man that comes home to his summer home, but he's committed this horrific deed, and there's a lot of drug use. There was so much dialogue, and then when my lead actor bailed, I reread the script, and I was like, I'm going to cut out all the dialogue, and I'm going to make it about a mother coming home. And that completely changed the tone. And then I started thinking about those quiet moments. And one of my favorite movies is The Shining, where there's so many quiet moments and that tension build up and those moments where you're not sure what's going on and they're being haunted and is it a ghost? So that's where it ended up being, instead of kind of like this dirty, not slasher and not dirty in like a bad way, but like a darker thing. It's dark, but it's more psychological, I guess, now.
So where can people see Revisit?
It's popping up here and there, and I have a Vimeo page. My production company is Night Frizz Productions, and they can find, I have done other shorts, so they could see my work there.
Fantastic. And what's up next for you?
I'm really super excited. I just wrapped my first SAG short horror film, and I wrote the screenplay for that one, and it's called Indolence. And it's a play on sloth, the 7 deadly sins, and but it's a teenager perspective for sloth. And then I have another script called Avarice, which is about greed, and I'm going to film that later this winter.
Jennifer Trudrung, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
The next film I felt was exceptional also won the award for Best Regional Short, and that was director Melissa Knapp's Feast. The story. Pilar and Forrest host an annual dinner party and have invited a new guest, their eager IT intern Will, who thinks he's climbing the social ladder. What was supposed to be a fun evening of champagne and networking turns into an uncomfortable dinner party. Now, this was a visually rich film with a very assured style that commented on the many ways that we are divided as a society, and the final moments push that home with a visual image that qualifies as horrible beautiful. But, as Vanessa Wright explains, there's a story behind the film that is just as impressive. Did you have a lot of return filmmakers, people who made their film or one film the year before and they came back with a new piece?
We did. We had a fair amount of returning finalists. And we actually, the winner of the regional block, it has such a great story. So Melissa, she attended last year, just as a actress. She was in one of the features last year called Dead Thirsty, which has since been released and is called Rave Party Massacre. She came and she was like, you know what? I want to come back next year. I'm gonna go and make a film just for this fest. And she did. She went out and wrote and directed Feast and ended up winning. And to me, like, that's such an inspiring story, that she herself felt so inspired by, you know, the environment and the people that she met in this event, that she went out and created something.
And Feast is beautiful. Visually amazing and arresting. And I'm surprised because the production value seems very self-assured that would be someone's first foray into actually directing as opposed to being an actor. So she obviously learned quite a bit from where she came.
Yeah, she's all around an extremely talented woman. I really hope I get to work with her. Wink, wink.
One of the all-around strongest categories at the festival was Laugh Until You Die, horror comedy shorts. I spoke with Vanessa about the mixture of horror and comedy. What I think is really interesting and why I really appreciate a lot of the comedy ones is that comedy's not easy. Timing. I mean, horror is all about timing, and so is comedy. And to be able to mix those two and have something really entertaining is not easy.
No, it takes a lot of skill to do that. And I think when you're able to pull it off and you hit those beats right at the right time, I mean, I kind of equate it almost to music. Like, you've got to get that rhythm.
And here are some of the standouts in the horror comedy category. Keloid, directed by Brendan Pollicut and produced by lead actor Taylor Cathcart. The story. Libby donates a kidney to her fiancé Dom. After he breaks off the engagement, yeah, you heard that right, she goes on a mission to get her kidney back. You can guess where this is going, but you'll be surprised at the comic twists and the great comic performances and how well the gore flips between laughter and, cringeworthy. And that's not so easy to do. The Apocalypse Will Be Automated, directed by Melanie Killingsworth. The story. In the year 2021, a virus wreaks havoc in Melbourne. Quarantine is established as recently dead roam the streets, and three friends make a run for it using all the technology at their disposal. I loved how well this movie set up its premise and then used an elegantly simple monkey wrench to turn tension into comedy and then satire. What Metal Girls Are Into, directed by Laurel Vale. The story. Three women going to a 3-day metal festival in the desert find something disturbing in the freezer of their isolated vacation rental. I love the deadpan humor in this movie and its pacing. Big props for how well Laurel set up a sense of realistic geographic space during chases and fights. When I can feel a hallway before I can see it on screen, that's a good eye for action. And the movie has a quote to die for. I can't believe I made out with a guy in a Slipknot t-shirt. Now, that's metal. And then there was one of the major crowd pleasers, Lunch Ladies, written by Clarissa Jacobson and directed by J.M. Logan. The story. Two burnt-out high school lunch ladies do whatever it bloody takes on their quest to become Johnny Depp's personal chefs. Yes, you heard that right. Normally, I don't like the comedy and horror comedies to be too broad. And I have to say, it took a minute or two for this movie to win me over. But the broadness jumped over into absurdism, and I ended up in the lunch line too. I spoke with Vanessa about the appeal of Lunch Ladies.
I'm a huge fan of it. I'm so glad that it got audience choice. I mean, it's an audience pleaser. I mean, I've seen it screen several times at fests, and it's so much fun to actually watch the audience watch it. because it's so much fun.
Yeah, I have to say, when it first came on, it was so broad that, and the WWJD on the dashboard and everything, I'm going, ooh, I don't know if I'm going to like this. And then it went absolutely absurd that it's really about Johnny Depp.
Right.
These lunch ladies who want to be Johnny Depp's personal chefs.
Yeah.
And then there's this moment that is like the perfect theater of the absurd when you finally see them at work. And there's this great, German sounding music and people playing trumpets. And this is really above what you normally see.
Oh, yeah.
And just the amount of people, the extras that were in it. There's so much choreography in that I was really blown away.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It was like a perfectly executed dance. Yeah, I would love to sit down sometime with Clarissa and, everyone else and kind of just be like, tell us what the behind the scenes were like, really. Like, let's see. Because, they nailed it. They really nailed it.
And that brings me to the surprisingly original and, shall we say, daring horror comedy, director Sarah K. Reamer's Bitten.
Good night. Don't let the bed bugs bite.
The story. Under a full moon, lives are forever altered when a mysterious and violent encounter sends a dog on a night of adventure and possibility. Meanwhile, his lonesome owner goes out on the hunt, only to find her prey unexpectedly closer to home. A supernatural, genre-defying tale. That's the synopsis. Let's just say that the synopsis does not cover the hilarious and creepy core of Bitten. The subversive joy of Bitten is that everyone feels good after watching it, completely forgetting the rather unsettling taboo it flirts with. I won't give it away. Bitten was the winner of the Best Comedy Short. I talked with Vanessa about the film's crowd-pleasing appeal.
When that one actually came in, it was funny because, Sam and I, we really do. We watch every single film, which is a feat in and of itself. But I'm trying to, I think I might have caught that one first. But I remember calling her and I was like, you've got to see this one. I was like, I'm not going to say anything. Just watch it. And the judges felt the same way. They adored it. It was so clever and so well done.
If there were gateway drugs to the world of horror, I think the gateway drugs would be the psychological horror film and the thriller. The short films that were included in these festival categories rooted themselves in the real world but used the horror genre to distort it. Some of the stories may have included supernatural elements, but the monsters in these movies were horribly human. Here were some of the standouts. From the psychological horror shorts block, Beyond Repair, written and directed by Robbie Barnes. The story. Jorah's late-night stop to use the bathroom will have you thinking twice about stopping at gas stations in small towns ever again. Pretty sordid, huh? This film gave me a different perspective about something as simple as how stopping to use a restroom can have a sense of danger and risk to it if you're a woman traveling alone. It's not something I've ever felt, and Robbie Barnes uses horror elements and the supernatural to up the anxiety. Heartless, directed by Kevin Sluter and produced by Jennifer Sluter. The story is based on Edgar Allan Poe's The Telltale Heart. An overlooked associate struggles to complete a corporate presentation as a horrific secret gnaws at her conscience. I've talked with Kevin and Jen for my 5 Horrible Questions segment before the festival, and after seeing it on the big screen, I appreciated it even more for its visceral impact and its tight editing. And it's got a good homage to the movie Funny Games. Blood Runs Down, directed by Sandashi Brown. The story. When a woman undergoes a frightening transition, her vigilant 5-year-old daughter must decide between saving her or protecting herself in this haunting tale of inheritance, daughterhood, and demons. Blood Runs Down won the Best Psychological Thriller category with an amazing performance at its center by child actor Farrah Martin. I asked Vanessa about Blood Runs Down and Farrah's performance. How old was the actress who was in that film?
I recall, I think she was 10, so I would guess 9 probably when they filmed it, or somewhere in there. I mean, she's a young girl. And it's heavy duty subject matter. I don't know, I'd be curious to know kind of what the director used or said to kind of get her to those places without scarring her,
There were a few standouts in the thriller category as well. Vanita Olzos-Graham's Amy's in the Freezer was a great twist on the bank robbery gone wrong storyline. A bank robber takes a hostage with him to a secluded cabin, only to find out his troubles have just started. There are plenty of twists to this film, but what stood out for me was the unconventional characterization of the bank robber. He's neither a calculating killer nor a rage-fueled hothead, the traditional easy choices. Nope. He's just a guy stupid enough to think he could rob a bank. His anxious and ultimately remorseful performance reminded me of Al Pacino's character in Dog Day Afternoon, and that kind of setup is a great one for the twists that the movie is going to give us. The music critic Lester Bangs once described the first Ramones album as all killer, no filler. The same can be said for director Izzy Lee's Rites of Vengeance. This movie packs a wallop and is as elegant in its simplicity as it is brutal in its execution. I got to speak with Izzy Lee about Rites of Vengeance, as well as the book she's authored. Izzy Lee is the real deal. All killer, no filler.
And here we are, once again, coming from the Women in Horror Film Festival here in Peachtree City, Georgia. And I've got the pleasure right now to talk with Izzy Lee. Now, Izzy is a director who's had a 2-time nomination for Rondo Awards. She's directed Innsmouth and For a Good Time Call, and the most recent film that's here is Rites of Vengeance. And let me tell you, we've got ourselves something that's really interesting here. That is the right catharsis at the right time. So, Izzy, thanks so much for being here. Why don't you give people a little bit of an idea of what your movie's about, Rites of Vengeance?
Well, in short, it's about a trio of nuns who discover someone, a priest, who is doing really, really bad things within their midst, and they just decide to enact a little justice because the world doesn't ever give these guys justice. They just move them around from parish to parish or country to country or state to state, and they keep getting to be criminals. So they do something quite illegal, but you know what? Yeah.
Right. Well, what I think is really interesting about this movie is it could be a silent film. In fact, I don't think there's any dialogue whatsoever that's heard over from any of the characters on camera, right? So I think that's very important for this film, because this is a movie that is really about talk is over, and what we need is some form of action. And it's really about, for me at least, what I was feeling while I was sitting there, being someone who's been through some issues with religious persecution and religions covering things up. It was time for that rage to be able to come out and be undiluted. Nobody in this movie for a moment second guesses what they're doing. So what was your thoughts about how you wanted to put this together?
It's a hard question to answer because I had a couple iterations of the script, and I went back and forth because it's a subject that it can so be exploitative, and that's usually where films like this go, because it is really hard to make it quite serious. And the only film that I can think of that treats this subject very seriously, just off the top of my head, is Spotlight, and then actually there was maybe one in the 90s. Sleepers. Yes, Sleepers. Yeah. You know, Affleck, whatever. But I had a really hard time trying to get just the right tone, because I wanted to take it very seriously and yet have that sort of catharsis and not head over the line where it's goofy or it's just titillating or whatever. And, maybe some people do see it like that. I don't know.
Well, I have to say, the first moment that I saw one of the nuns appear in the film, and for those that haven't seen it, you'll have to see what I'm talking about, but there is a moment when there's an appearance of characters that normally you would not see in the light that you're seeing them in. And I laughed. But it wasn't a laugh of like, oh, this is silly. It was a laugh like, holy shit, this is crazy. So since you're also a writer, and you wrote for Birth, Movies, Death, and Rue Morgue, and Diabolique, and doing something that doesn't have any dialogue, how hard did you find that when you're someone who really appreciates exposition?
Well, I do appreciate brevity. I do appreciate crispness. So originally it was like a short script, then it was maybe like more of a 12 to 15 minute script, and then I pared it back again, and then I just boiled it down to the bare bones, and I said, all right, I'm going to trust my audience. It's going to speak for itself. I don't need a word. It doesn't need it. The nuns, some of them might have a touch of malice and glee in their eyes. Some of them maybe just a little bit. Heather Buckley, who is a producer on The Ranger, plays one of them. She's my enforcer nun, I call her. Yeah, we had a good time, as much as could be expected on a one-day shoot in January in Boston. So, yay.
And you found yourself a sympathetic church, or did you just basically find a way to steal these shots?
They took my money, and I said, this is a dream sequence, and it's about faith. And that's not lies. It's just omissions, perhaps, but, I don't care. We were on another shoot as extras there for a friend, and they were really hands-off and really chill, and I had sort of scouted a whole bunch of churches, and that was the one I could get away the most with. So, yeah, that worked out.
I also really appreciate the brevity. One of the things that I thought when I was watching, I said, well, there we go. We have our Ramones song. This is all killer, no filler whatsoever. So thank you so much for that film. Let's talk a little bit about your writing, because you have a few books that you have out right now. You have collections that you're involved in. So what one would you like to talk about? I see that you have Fright into Flight.
I do, and this is probably my most grim story to date in here. Believe it or not, after seeing Wright's. The one that I have in here is called I Did It for the Art, and it is it's about a really disgusting fashion photographer who takes advantage of his underage models. And they go out on a shoot one weekend from New York to Dudleytown, Connecticut, and something follows him back, and he's never the same again, let's just say that.
Awesome. And Fright into Flight is a compilation of stories by all women?
Yes. It's 100% female horror writers. We have, people in here like Nadia Bulkin, who's had success with, She Sets Destroy, one of her, or I think her first short story collection. We've got Gemma Files, who's amazing. She's a Canadian writer and film historian. I haven't been able to read her stuff yet here in this book, but Experimental Film, that book she has is so awesome, and so many others, and I'm just thrilled to be included with them. And Lost Films, which is the other new one, it's all about festivals and location shoots and lost things that have happened within the world of shooting films. So the story that I have in this one is sort of it was an experiment of sorts, because I wrote it in reverse, and it was kind of like rewinding a tape, and it was about a location scout that no one really survives. So, yeah, there's that. It's called Famous Last Words.
If anybody who's listening wants to see Rites of Vengeance, where's the next place that they'll be able to see it?
It's a good question, because it's still playing festivals, but it might be on an online platform very soon. The details are still being discussed, so there's nothing confirmed there yet, but it could be online very soon. I also have another short on the circuit right now called My Monster, which is a horror comedy, because after Rights, I need to lighten up just a little bit. And that stars Brea Grant, who's been in many, many things, like All the Creatures Restoring, and Rob Zombie's Halloween 2, and Beyond the Gates, so many things. And Adam Egypt Mortimer, who is a director of Some Kind of Hate, and the upcoming film with Patrick Schwarzenegger, and the name is escaping me right now. It's something like Daniel is not okay or something. He did it with Spectrovision.
Right.
Yeah.
I did see
Yeah. So He plays a very douchey bro. Just hilarious.
So what's coming up next for you?
Well, I am writing more stuff. I'm currently writing 2 feature scripts at the moment and traveling to festivals and just figuring things out. So, yay!
Yeah, indeed. You love horror. Obviously, you're a genre person. What was your first kiss with horror? What was the movie that just said, okay, I'm going to ruin my life by following this stuff?
I can't remember which came first, if it was all the Roger Corman, Vincent Price Poe films, or if it was An American Werewolf in London by John Landis. Because that I have a very clear memory of seeing, but with all the Price stuff, I sort of like glommed on him like, hey, this is my virtual grandpa. Like, all these films are amazing, and they're so lush and weird and nightmarish and sort of fairy tale-like and totally bizarre, and I love them so fucking much. So it's sort of a mix of both, because I think I discovered them in the same formative years. So, yeah, there we go.
Izzy Lee, thank you so much for being on the show with me.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
There was one thriller that spoke deeply to Vanessa as well as many of the other attendees. That film is Lady Hunters, and it was directed by Angela Atwood.
Lady Hunters, really, I'd say kind of got in there.
Yeah. Can you give a quick synopsis of Lady Hunters?
Yeah, I hope I can do this to Angela Atwood's liking. But basically, it was a group of 3 women, 3 mothers that had gotten together, for a weekend, and they had found out that this rapist who had been put away was being released after very little time served. And they were angry. They were angry that justice had not been served, and, that there was a real victim out there who was never going to get kind of that sense of freedom and self back. And they took it upon themselves to, I guess, right the wrong.
Do certain things.
I don't want to give anything away.
Exactly. They take matters into their own hands.
They take matters into their own hands, and in a very righteous way,
The thing that really stood out to me in Lady Hunters was the similarities and moral ambiguity that I felt when I first watched John Borman's Deliverance. I felt the same thing through this film, because there is conviction and there is vengeance, but there's also doubt. And that doubt makes Lady Hunters more than just a revenge film. The words body horror make some people run for the exits, and it makes others lean forward in their seats after they put down their popcorn. Body horror is obsessively focused on the fragility of our bodies and on our fear of death. But the thing that is most profound about body horror is that it focuses on our fear of entropy, our slow and irreversible decline before death. That makes body horror, underneath all the copious gore, so emotionally unsettling and so powerful when it's done right. It hits on our fear of losing the things about ourselves that we think make us who we are. There was one film that was so powerful and unsettling that there are visual images that still wallop me when I hear its title. That movie is director Marina Ginello's Entropia. The story. An aging woman attempts to regain her youth through her taxidermy and spell books. And that is a wonderfully vague and subtle description of this film. I heard Marina talking at a Q&A the day before Entropia premiered. She basically told everyone if they wanted to come see the movie, they better make sure that they ate a few hours before they came to the screening. She said that with a lot of glee in her eyes. I'm going to leave that foreboding announcement as all you really need to know about Entropia before you see it. And if you're a body horror fan, you're going to want to see it. Hunt this film down and support the film festival that is showing it. You can hate me later. And that brings me to the most adventurous category at the festival, the experimental horror films. Now, at first blush, a lot of people might see this as an odd mixture, but I don't. Both horror and experimental film dive directly into our emotional cores, and they can both be effective without the need of a linear narrative. Both horror and experimental film can use powerful imagery and sound to create a mood and a story within the mind of the viewer. Sometimes horror is at its best when it doesn't show you what the monster looks like or precisely why you're feeling frightened. The dread and fear wash over you at an instinctual level when you watch an experimental horror film. And that brings me to discuss director Shana Connolly's fantastic short film, Quiver.
I am such a huge fan of Shana Connolly now. Her work is amazing. I just want to see more and more of it. And she's, one, just a phenomenal human being, but she's an amazing artist. And the film is, I mean, it literally is just watching a masterpiece of art. It's I don't know how else to describe it outside of just absolutely beautiful. It was beautifully done, beautifully interpreted, beautifully executed.
Yeah, it was something that I absolutely love because I think that's what the reason for festivals is. You know, the spirit of the festival is for these films that are going to have a hard time finding an audience. They're not going to get picked up very easily.
And
they'll have small niches.
Yeah, and I agree, especially with an experimental film. That is not everyone's cup of tea. And I'll be the first to admit that I generally am not a huge fan of experimental cinema. Most of it just goes straight over my head, and I'm like, what the hell did I just look at? But I think the films that we had in that block, so many of them had it was just such a unique way to tell that particular story, whichever one we're speaking of. They were cool.
I got to talk to Shana Connolly about the nature of experimental film and the story behind her film, Quiver.
And we're back here at the Women in Horror Film Festival, and we just watched the Experimental Horror Shorts block of films. And one of the real outstanding films that I saw was Quiver, which was directed and written by Shana Connolly. And I have Shana here to talk a little bit about what is experimental horror in the first place, because you're really not going to be able to explain the plot of the film. So give us a little bit of an insight on what you think experimental horror is all about.
So experimental narrative is downplays the plot, is more about mood and atmosphere. And Quiver is an experimental horror because it deals with grief and hauntings and a ghost.
I think it's really interesting because when I was initially watching it, I felt the grief and I felt that there was this longing for something. And I always took the longing as loneliness. But at one point you mentioned it was about desire. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, fear and desire, fear is the flip side of desire. And horror cinema is about transgressing boundaries. And a ghost transgresses a boundary. And so both grief and desire are based on absence. So the absence of someone that you love and that you cannot be with for some reason. And desire is also related to grief in the sense that when you're emerging from grief, not that you ever get over a loss, a catastrophic loss, but when you start to come back into the world and can function in the world a little bit, the first feeling that really penetrates that haze of grief is desire for something. And sometimes it's a romantic desire, physical desire. Sometimes it's, like for me, the desire to create something.
I wanted to get back to the concept of experimental. What do you think is the major difference between experimental and expressionism? Because a lot of horror films live in the world of expressionism, and yet experimental film is just a little bit different, even though they have kind of kissing cousins.
So both experimental film and expressionism. Expressionism has a lot of experimental elements. So the key difference between narrative and non-narrative, which is another term for experimental, is cause and effect. And when you have a film where you have, human beings or entities who are clear agents, that one does something and somebody else reacts, that's a narrative. And if you downplay cause and effect, which is possible when you only have one human character in the film, and are based more on associations, that's that experimental element. And a lot of expressionist cinema is based on visual association. So there is a link there, very definitely.
It was interesting. The visual images, of course, are the things that are the great motivators in experimental, and you feel them much more than you can think about them. And there was a moment that reminded me very much, in fact, there were a couple moments that reminded me of Tarkovsky's Mirror very often. And especially my favorite is someone scraping the silver off of a mirror, turning it into just a piece of glass, like taking all the memories off. And it was just something I could have watched all day, weirdly enough, because it was such an interesting, peaceful, and silent, and almost like a death in and of itself. And there were moments that I thought were very exciting where the person was a professor, the main character, and she takes down these chalkboards and she's giving a class, and just about everything that's happening in the movie is written out, but in a major scribble. And it's just like, oh my gosh, that's like her brain right now. So I talk about the quiet moments that you've put in there, and talk about some of the more, I wouldn't say explosive, but ones where you feel as if you're overwhelmed.
So that private grief where, she's emerging from it and she's trying to rebuild her identity, which is why she's refurbishing the mirror and scraping off the backing that no longer really, the mirror is decayed, it needs repair. And so you scrape off that backing, it becomes a piece of glass, and then you have to silver it. You have to create that new backing that is pristine so you can see the reflection, see your image. And in terms of the sound design, those quiet moments versus the explosive moments, we wanted to emphasize that time slows down and your perceptions get strange and bendy when you're grieving, and that's the same thing as a haunting. Like, you perceive something is there, whether you feel it through a quiver or if you see it out of the corner of your eye. These things are all a product of a mindset of grief a lot of times. And the sound, like, she has a breakthrough moment. She has to physically not just break through this veil between her realm and the ghost realm, but she also has to, with the ghost, create a brand new space. And that needs to be an explosion of some kind. And then the new space has to have a radically different sound to it than either the ghost realm or her realm. And so it has more of a sci-fi outer space kind of underwater feel.
So I know we've been talking about Tarkovsky and things like that, and when we talk about experimental films, a lot of people go, well, that's perhaps not really horror. And there are, of course, filmmakers here that are dipping their toes for the first time into horror, but it sounds like you have a little bit of a background that has a devout interest in horror. Can you explain that a little bit?
Well, I'm obsessed with ghosts, and when I was growing up, I was obsessed with a book called Haunted Houses, and it was in the nonfiction section of my library, and I used to just check it out all the time and keep renewing it until they made me return it, and then I would check it out again as soon as it was reshelved. And so I've always been fascinated with ghosts. And as I got older and as I started making more films, I was just exploring hauntings in various ways. So sometimes you were haunted by the presence of a person that you lost, and sometimes you are haunted by a traumatic event, or you have a traumatic experience and it leads to an obsession. And you can be haunted also by anxiety. And so I've made films about all of these things and put them into a collection of 8 shorts. that are stylistically very different. Some of them are purely experimental films. Some are documentaries, personal documentaries, and experimental narratives. So I don't foresee that I will stop doing this anytime soon, because it really is kind of what feeds me as an artist.
Where can people see Quiver, and where can people see the rest of your work and follow you?
Well, I have a website, shanaconnelly.com, and I have, right now what I'm trying to do, only one of the films is available online on the website. Some of my earlier work is available online, but this collection of 8 I'm trying to tour as a full hour-long program, and 3 of those are currently still in festivals, and then I just finished 2 more that will be going out as well. So those can't be online right now, but if someone really wants to see something, they can contact me.
Fantastic. And what do you think of the festival so far? What are your impressions?
This place is magical. Women in Horror Film Festival is a really magical experience and a transformative one for me as an artist. It's such a positive environment and there's so many filmmakers here. There's so many horror fans here and people like you who promote horror, and it's been incredible because I've been to a lot of festivals, and this one really celebrates women and a genre that I love, and there's so much variety in the programming, and it's just been a delight, an absolute delight to be here.
Shana Connelly, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
I've just scratched the surface of the 70 short films that were at the festival, and I'll be posting a list of all the films and the artists who made them. Now, after watching all of those movies, I saw several themes that were dominant in the art presented this year at the Women in Horror Film Festival. Vanessa and I sat down and compared notes on what our interpretations were. Now, I noticed some themes while I was watching all these films, and why I think that that's really interesting is that these movies were not coming from one place. They were from other countries. There were a few films that were from, I think, across the globe, and there were still the same themes. And what I saw was threats in private places, threats of privacy. There were tons of bathrooms and bedrooms that were not safe, were not clean, were not nice. So it was kind of like no privacy, no safety, no sanctity, and people not being believed when they say there's danger. And I think, what did you see when you were looking at all these movies? You're screening all of these. Did you feel this overwhelming, wow, we've got a serious theme boiling here?
Yeah, and it's interesting that you kind of hit it exactly right. And I think that's a real, I guess, commentary on where we are as a society right now. Because, I mean, think about it. We almost really do have no privacy. And there is dangerous things happening in, these quote unquote kind of secure places. And that's a real fear. And I think horror is able to kind of delve into those fears and really explore them in ways and articulate them in ways that people can really relate to. It's, and being a lifelong fan of horror, we see that through the time. I mean, I think there are different times when we've got, it's a reflection of what's happening in society, really.
The festival also showcased 5 full-length films that also examine the themes that were so prominent over the weekend. And each of the feature films were good representations of different cinematic styles that horror can employ. We had a slow burn horror film from Argentina entitled Relic, a Mesopotamic Tale, directed by Laura Sanchez Acosta. The Story. A father and his young daughter return to their old country house as a form of therapy to grieve the death of the girl's mother. However, the therapy doesn't go as planned, as the daughter becomes obsessed about a mythical creature that may or may not be in the woods. Relic takes a lot of risks by demanding the audience's attention with long, unbroken takes within one interior location, only 2 characters, and minimal dialogue. It's a movie full of hypnotic soundscapes, and the director wants you to feel the power of nature encroaching. Unfortunately, the one technical snag that occurred at the festival happened during this screening. There was an error in the digital copy of the movie at the hour mark, and the rest of the movie was unplayable. Now, this was disappointing, but this is the drawback to the modern film festival. Projection disasters can no longer be solved with scissors and hot splices and profuse profanity that usually ended with applause for the restart of the film. But when you're in the festival world, you learn to roll with the changes. Even though the Women in Horror Film Festival took place nearly a month before Halloween, 2 of the horror features were Christmas themed. The first was writer-director Brooklyn Ewing's She Was So Pretty, Be Good for Goodness Sake, a sequel to Ewing's She Was So Pretty. In the original, Valerie Vestron and her friends go to a cabin to party, only to run into Alfred James Ellis III, a quiet, awkward, and deadly serial killer. Valerie is taken by Alfred to points unknown. Unknown until the sequel, that is. In Be Good for Goodness Sake, we observe the dismal existence of what's left of Valerie and a few other women that Alfred has kept. At the same time, 2 of Valerie's friends are still searching for her, and they start finding clues that take them into Alfred's universe. And Alfred's universe is not a place you want to be, unless you're Alfred. Alfred is, among other unsettling quirks, obsessed with Christmas. He's like a child. He's fascinated with the lights and the candy and the extreme emotions. And as the movie continues, we find out that there is more than one person who is obsessed with Christmas and mutilation. With as much plasma that was spilled and depravity that was on display over the entire weekend, it was Brooklyn Ewing's movie that disturbed me. Actually, it angered me. And that may or may not have been a good thing. When it comes to showing the world of the women kept as playthings, Ewing neither sugarcoats nor goes for histrionics. This is a world of quiet desperation and shock and numbness and mutilation. There is a scene where Alfred releases the maimed women from their pens and treats them to a Christmas dinner of nothing but candy. Sappy Christmas music plays as we watch the last moments of individuality slowly give way to resignation as the women gobble down the sweets in total silence. There's not a shred of hope in the movie. It is drenched in despair. But what put me over the edge wasn't that. It was that for as authentically that Ewing showed the dehumanizing of these women, somehow she seems fascinated by Alfred. We spend a lot of time with him, and there are times that we are even asked to empathize when a more outwardly vile character bullies Alfred. What I can say is that the film started many long conversations with moral culpability and the fine line between reporting on exploitation and exploitation itself as being the central theme. Be Good for Goodness Sake has lingered with me, and I still don't know what I think of it. Brooklyn Ewing, if you're out there listening, I'd be interested in talking to you. Our next Christmas-themed horror film is All the Creatures Were Stirring, directed by Rebecca and David Ian McKendry. This is a horror anthology, and the framing story takes place at an underground theater production on Christmas Eve. The movie's title not only refers to the beasties in the stories, but also to the strange clientele who gather at the theater to escape the manufactured comfort and joy of the holidays. In the tradition of horror anthologies, there is a tongue-in-cheek atmosphere to the framing story, which is used to introduce the tales. Each of the stories takes on an irritating anxiety that the holiday can bring. Standout episodes include an office party that turns into a battle royale, and a last-minute shopping spree that involves a locked car in an empty parking lot, and a van that keeps circling the shopper, slowly getting closer and closer. But that setup doesn't follow the predictable storyline, and where it goes was one of my favorite surprises at the festival. There was another anthology film on display, director Simone Kissel's Bugs, a Trilogy, and this was a very welcome surprise. There certainly are spiders and bed bugs and other physical parasites that wreak havoc in the 3 horror stories that make up this film. However, the creepy crawlies are both literal and metaphorical in the stories. The bug, the parasite, is the ugly thought, or the hidden trauma, or the denial of the trauma, or the paranoia, or perhaps those are just symptoms of the infection caused by ignoring the feeding parasite for too long. And what is the feeding parasite? The parasites in question are other people. What's so effective is that at the beginning of each story, we are only aware of the symptoms, which are sometimes grotesque and unsettling. Be prepared for some bodily viscera. The causes of these symptoms are a complete mystery, and as the story unravels, we begin to see what we missed when we only focused on the effects. Bugs definitely plays with our unconscious habit of treating the symptoms instead of the cause when someone asks for help. The movie comments on how we as a culture misdiagnose all the time. We assume someone unlikable can't be telling the truth. We assume the paranoid person is the only sick person in the relationship, and we assume that there's only one abuser in any given family. It's heavy stuff, but director Simone Kissel makes a horror film that does what a horror film should. It takes themes we might find too uncomfortable to watch in a drama more accessible by introducing stand-in boogeymen to soothe the sting. Last, but not least, is Echoes of Fear, directed by Brian and Lo Avnet Bradley, a wonderfully creepy and effective horror film. The story. After inheriting her grandfather's house, Alyssa must confront the mystery of his sudden death and the evil that hides inside the house. Echoes of Fear is equally a throwback to elegant horror movies like The Innocents, and a modern look at the fine line between the natural world and the supernatural. And it has perfectly timed moments of suspense and scares. I say scares with a smile. See, the audiences at horror film festivals are jaded veterans, so there aren't many occasions where the audience jumps at a scare sequence. There are at least 2 moments in Echoes of Fear where everyone jumped and popcorn flew, and then everyone laughed in joy. That's like a standing ovation at a horror film festival. I talked with co-director Brian Avnet Bradley about his film and his real-life experiences that influenced the direction of the film.
And welcome back. We're here at the Women in Horror Film Festival, and we're here in beautiful Peachtree City, Georgia, and we have just watched a feature film called Echoes of Fear by Brian and Lo Avnet Bradley. It is a family team. They make a movie inside of a scary house, and I just want to talk to the director for a little bit and tell him how much I like the film. And Brian, can you give us a little bit of an idea of what the movie's about?
Yeah, I'm keeping it kind of secret to not ruin it, but basically the gist of the movie is the main character named Alyssa, her grandfather dies right in the beginning of the movie, and she inherits his house, and she can't keep it for tax reasons, so she basically has to clean it up and get it sold, but in the process of doing that, she uncovers there's an evil inside the house, and it's like a mystery she has to uncover about what happened there and why her grandfather died.
So it's a ghost story, but it also has quite a bit of suspense. The evil isn't necessarily what you think the evil's going to be. I noticed that your ghost was a little bit different, and I don't think I'm giving away a lot, that it seems as if there's a presence perhaps inside of this house. How does your ghost differ from what we're normally seeing these days?
Well, what I really wanted to do, I kind of started this way a little bit with our third feature we did together, Dark Remains. But what I wanted to do was basically the ghost is kind of in a torment trapped dimension in a way. It's like, so the ghost is kind of tormented. So it's not like a ghost that you would see like, an old school ghost where it looks very similar to the person who was alive and behaves similarly. It's more like this trapped pain of this residual trapped pain that you can't get out. And so that's kind of reflects with how she looks and how she moves and how she acts. So that's kind of where that comes from.
I will say that when watching the beginning, the first half hour of this film, it had a feel that I usually think is a personal touch. Is there anything in this film that comes from real life?
Well, yeah, basically almost everything in the first act, which kicks off the movie, is all events that really happened. Basically, we bought this house, and we live in it still. And within the first year, all these things happened in this house, which are reflected. We can't get into them too much without spoiling it, but it was reflected in the first act of the film. And I just started jotting down all these events, which I didn't really have an explanation for. So I knew like there were all these really creepy things to do in this house because it happened there. But then trying to figure out, of course, what took the time was figuring out what that turns into and what that means. And that's when the movie kind of expands. But it basically has a grounding in real events happening in the house, and that still happen in kind of a freaky way today.
Well, I'm interested. The film also had a very distinct look in cinematography. It was very clean, but it also changed kind of the language that was going on. It went to steady, not Steadicam exactly, but more of a handheld feel. Mm-hmm. So it starts when the tension isn't necessarily high in a relatively standard, nice panning shots,
nice, smooth,
static
smooth
shots,
movement, yeah.
and it gets more erratic. Cinematography is really great. Who did the cinematography?
Well, that's also the co-director, Lo. She's also the cinematographer of the movie. So she's wearing both hats doing that, in addition to wearing a producer hat as well. So, I mean, we're very much like a team. We've been doing this for a while now. It's our 5th horror feature. And we have a very close working relationship, having done all the films together and also being married. So it just kind of organically evolves from that. But she works as a cinematographer and camera operator on a bunch of other shorts and features and television series and stuff like that. So that's really her bread and butter, is as a shooter. And this gives her an ability to do something that she normally isn't called upon to do, because she loves very high contrast images. She likes very high contrast photography and very strong lighting between blacks and whites. That's what she really likes. So she doesn't usually get to use that toolkit because most people don't want that for the other stuff that she shoots. So she's able to fully employ that when we do films together, which is awesome.
I have a question visually. There's a recurring visual shot of someone's eyes being held open by another character, by something behind them. This idea of being forced to look.
Right.
What were you going for? Is there more than one way that's being done inside of this film?
Well, it's like what that really is like exactly. It's like it's a literal thing, being forced to look at these visions and what's happening with the supernatural, but also allegorically, the main character is being forced into seeing things as they are. So that's kind of like, so it kind of works on two ways in that sense.
And it's an absolutely disturbing image. There's a movie by Dario Argento called Opera. Where, yes. And I thought of that as soon as I saw that scene, because I was going, wow. It felt like a beautiful image, a very simple image to get across a very complicated thought about finding out something really horrible about people that you thought you knew.
Yeah, it's great.
So I really appreciated the movie. You've been working with your wife since 1999. Is that what I heard?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So how does the collaboration go? Do you is there one person who comes up with the idea and the other shapes, or is it just as it goes?
Well, I mean, it depends. She comes up with ideas too. We haven't done those yet. It hasn't happened. But what usually happens is I'll come up with an idea and kind of talk about it with her and map it out a little bit, and then I'll go away and kind of do this first draft. And then she kind of gets to look at it with fresh eyes, because she's not really involved in actually the typing and the writing and the breaking down of the first draft. But then she gets that and she can look at it with fresh eyes, and so she can have a lot of story ideas, like really big story ideas, and really change the movie. And because she has the fresh eyes, I can take that and go in and kind of incorporate that and take another couple of passes, and that's kind of how we work. I think it works really well because she's always able to have a fresher perspective, while I'm like forest for the trees, because I'm in there typing, so she's able to see. Like, I used to joke, like early on I would do a script and I'd get notes back that her note would be like giant lines through the page going boring, so we've evolved way beyond that, but so it's a really, really collaborative relationship. The only thing that doesn't bleed in the collaboration is, I mean, she's definitely the cinematographer, but other than that, almost everything we do, there's always an overlap. It's just a matter of how much one person's doing something or the other. but there's always like a joint overlap, I think.
Well, it was a very clean and seamless film in many different ways. It had a great pace to it. And I will say jump scares, something that at a horror festival you would think there'd be a lot of. These were probably the best timed jump scares that I had seen since I've been here. So bravo on that. I know a few jaded people who jumped right behind me, and which made me laugh because we were just complaining about that last night, and we're going, yes, there it is, we got our fix.
Oh, that's great.
Where can people see Echoes of Fear from here on out?
Really, right now, it's like we're just starting the dance of talking to distributors and seeing how that goes. So, of course, the goal is to find a good distributor who can do a good job releasing the movie in as many formats as possible so people can have the options to see the movie. But, it takes time to make the deal, blah, blah, blah. And even after you make the deal, there's always a 3 or 4 month lag for them to place it. So it would probably be like looking at like summer next year or fall next year, if not at a festival.
Wait, and what's coming up next for you guys?
Well, the next thing we're doing besides shepherding this movie through is we have a illustrated horror novella that we've actually had for a while. We've been like 99% done on it, but the movies keep preventing us. So we promised ourselves we're going to buckle down and get that done, and that's Innards, the illustrated horror novella. And it's really fun because it's like 1 page of text and an image that goes with each page. But it's a very different story for us. We're excited to get that out there.
Well, that's great. And one last question I ask just about everybody. What was your first kiss with horror? What was the movie that put you down this terrible path?
Well, my first kiss with horror, my first memory as a 3-year-old is pulling back the covers and seeing a skeleton in my bed. Because my dad had placed it there as a joke. My second memory is my mom chewing my dad out for placing a skeleton in my bed. So I don't know if that led into it, but I think in a way it did. And then also there was some personal experience of the family dealing with death. And, I think that left an impact. And the other side of it is I've always enjoyed like kind of the thrill, fun side of horror. I mean, I grew up watching a lot of the quintessential 70s and 80s movies, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, original Dawn of the Dead, Romero, John Carpenter's The Thing. All these types of movies were like very, very influential. First Hills Have Eyes, very influential, Last House on the Left. All these movies kind of like had a really strong impact on me watching them as a kid and watching them on bootleg VHSs because my parents wouldn't let me rent them. So, it's like I think my inspiration comes from that and what that meant to me growing up, combined with like my experiences that I have in, real horror. So it's kind of like a fusing of the two, in a way.
Well, Brian, thank you so much for giving us some of your time, and congratulations on the fantastic film.
Well, thank you. Thanks for coming out and seeing it.
What I love about film festivals is that they exist to celebrate the joy of creating art. Many of the artists who show their films at festivals don't make money by attending, and often they're lucky to break even. They shoot their films on long weekends, and they do post-production at night after they get off from their paying gigs. They make movies because they are compelled to do so. And they come to festivals to have their movies seen and to meet folks just as obsessed as they are. The film festival may be the first time that an artist gets recognition for their work and praise from their peers. With that in mind, let's take a moment to acknowledge those that took home a Lizzie. Best Horror Comedy Short winner was Bitten. Best Animation Short winner was Count Your Curses. Best Horror Short winner was Keep the Gaslight Burning. Best Experimental Short was Quiver. Best Writing winner was Lady Hunters. Best Performance, the winner was Donna Peroni for her role in Lunch Ladies. Best Psychological Horror Short winner was Blood Runs Down. Best International Short winner was The Whistler. Best Thriller Short winner was The After Party. Best Body Horror Short winner was Entropia. Best Production Design winner was The Daughters of Virtue. The Nightmares Film Festival Better Horror Award winner was The Stare. That's S-T-A-R-E, not stare like stairs. Best trailer. And trailers were there. They were proof of concept teasers for the artists to try and get funding for a film. And the winner of Best Trailer was Do So. For the Best Student Short, the winner was Instinct. Best Regional Short, the winner was Feast. Best Sci-Fi Short, the winner was The Girl in the Galactic Sun. Best Feature Film, the winner was Echoes of Fear. Best Score, the winner was What Metal Girls Are Into. Best FX, the winner was Devorame. Austin Regional Film Festival Narrative Drive Award winner was Heartless. Best Director, Feature Film, the winner was Simone Kissel for Bugs, a Trilogy. Best Director for Short Film, the winner was Emily Dean for Andromeda. And the Indie Spirit Award winner was Z Sty, like Bed-Stuy, but with zombies. And Socially Conscious Narrative Award, the winner was Lady Hunters. The Best Editing, the winner was Rights of Vengeance. And Best Cinematography, the winner was Hinterland. Thank you for your art, all of you. Do you think the horror industry's become more progressive over the years, or welcoming to diverse creative voices in film festivals you've gone to, conventions?
I think it's improving little by little. I think it's going in the right direction. I don't think it's there yet. I still see horrible things. I try not to focus on it. I try to be a part of the positive change, which is what we're doing with this fest. We could probably fill books and hours of interviews with everything that's wrong. We know what's wrong. I think we just need to kind of keep moving and make things right. And I think that when you see things that are wrong, like, speak up. Don't be afraid to call people out on their shit.
What's next for Women in Horror Film Festival? Where are we going from here? What's 3 going to look like?
3 will probably look a little bit different for several reasons. One, this has been a really difficult decision for Sam, but she made the decision to step down, which I fully support. I completely understand, what she's wanting to do with her life and career. And this is an all-consuming event. And honestly, it's just been the two of us doing this for the last 2 years. It's a lot of work. So year 3 will be, without her, which will be difficult and different, but we're gonna power through. And I think we're changing the time of year. I've decided to move it to February in honor of National Women in Horror Month. I think that will get out of the craziness of the fall, which, being a horror filmmaker, fan, anything, October is just jam-packed and you can't do everything you want to do. So Women in Horror 3.0 will be in February of 2020. And I think we're also going to change venues. I think we're going to go into Atlanta and do some new things. It's going to be great.
An invasion, a siege. I like the idea.
The ADL. Watch out.
So where can listeners find out a little bit more about what the goings are that are happening in Women in Horror Film Festival? And even more important, if they're artists, how they can get their work seen?
So we are very active on social media. We have a Facebook page, Twitter, and an Instagram. Both Facebook and Twitter are WIHFF. Instagram is longer because that was the short one was already taken, which I thought was kind of funny. But it's Women in Horror Film Festival. Our website, which is WIHFF, we keep everything updated. We're on Film Freeway, that's the only platform where we accept submissions, which are open right now. We actually closed this year on Halloween of 2019 will be the last day. So we'll have our little trick or treat.
Yeah. And what kind of submissions can there be? There's film, also screenplays?
Yes, we accept both short and feature-length screenplays, short films, feature films. We have a category for music videos, a category for movie trailers. That might be all. And we accept all subgenres of horror. So, suspense, thrillers, science fiction, body horror, grindhouse. I mean, anything that kind of falls under that umbrella. We'll take a look at it.
Oh, fantastic. Well, Vanessa Ionta Wright, thank you so much for giving me some of your time, and thank you very much for your film festival.
Oh, thank you.
If you've enjoyed my rants and raves on this podcast, you might be interested in my new book. It's called Screaming for Pleasure, How Horror Makes You Happy and Healthy, and it is available now through your favorite book dealers. Screaming for Pleasure is a love letter to all things that go bump in the night and how horror not only reinvents itself to reflect each generation's anxieties, but it can also be healing as well as thrilling. It's a deeper dive into the obsessive ideas that I've espoused on the podcast, with a focus on welcoming people who can't remember the last horror film they watched. See, I want to encourage people who might have a preconceived notion about the genre to take a look from a different perspective. I hope to invite a new appreciation for this most underappreciated art form by showing its diversity and, yes, even the unexpected health benefits of letting horror into your life. Now, so far, the reviews for my book have been very good, and the word of mouth is growing. If you've gotten the book or expect to get it, I thank you so very much. And if you do buy my book, take a picture of yourself with it, screaming your head off, or pose with a picture in a weird location. For instance, if you live near the Amityville house, risk getting possessed for a brief flicker of fame. If you do take a picture, send a digital copy to me via my email address, scott@hellbentforhorror.com, and I will blast it on my social media. And I'm also going to add your photo to a special thank you collage I'm making to salute the early adopters to my version of The New Flesh. Thanks so much, folks. I do have a favor to ask. If you buy the book and you enjoy it, and if you're inclined to do so, I would greatly appreciate if you could write a review of the book online. If you order from Amazon, you can write a review on Amazon. Another great place to leave a review is goodreads.com. Reviews like yours from verified purchasers of the book are so important to help get the book visible on bookseller websites. Now, if you do write a review, let me know. I'll send you something absolutely useless, like a sticker that shows your superiority in taste of books. Hey, stickers work as motivation on Fitbit type things, and I'm open to experimentation. Stay hellbent. And thanks for listening to the show. Hellbent for Horror was written and broadcast by me, S.A. Bradley, and produced by me and Lisa Gorski. You can find more on our website, hellbentforhorror.com, and I'm also on Facebook at facebook.com/hellbentforhorror, and my Twitter handle is hellbenthorror. Please hit that subscribe button to get H4H hot off the press. And if you can do a review on iTunes or whatever app you listen to us on, that really helps people get to find us. And now for some Hellbent for Horror news. The podcast is available on some more outlets now, so you can listen to H4H on Spotify, iHeartRadio, and TuneIn Radio, as well as the regular iTunes, Android, and Amazon apps. And let there be swag. H4H t-shirts are now on sale. We have a store on tpublic.com with a bunch of Hellbent for Horror designs, and you can have your choice of t-shirts, sweatshirts, hoodies, coffee mugs, something horrible beautiful for you or that someone special. The link to the merchandise store is on our website, hellbentforhorror.com. And until we meet again, stay hellbent.